All right, welcome to another edition of D Community Conversations. I am Mike Parker, and I am joined today by Robert Schadek. He's one of my colleagues in the D Language Foundation team, and we are here today courtesy of our sponsors, Weka. Weka is a fast-growing company that's building a cloud and AI-native data platform that helps to solve complex data challenges for the world's leading enterprises and preeminent research organizations. Weka is a great place to work for developers looking to sharpen their D programming language coding skills and work on really interesting use cases. I am not employed at Weka, and neither is Robert. Robert works at Symmetry, as a lot of our D team actually does. And this is not the first time Robert has joined me for a Q&A interview thing. We've done this several times now for DConf Online, so you're used to being in the hot seat by now.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like, this is already hot, but standing on stage at DConf is even hotter. Like, I remember back in the day, like in 2013, like 10 minutes before my first talk, I realized that if there is ever an audience that technically is, or sort of from a technical knowledge perspective, is able to destroy me on air, because that was also recorded, that is it. And being my sort of first international and also recorded presentation, I got scared quite a bit. So this is absolutely fine. I mean, if push comes to shove, I can always hang up and leave you hanging here, right?
And we can always cut out all the embarrassing bits, right? Since we're pre-recording and not live streaming. Yeah. So I don't expect there to be any embarrassing bits, though. Yeah, I did go back and look at some of our previous conversations because I wanted to see how much of your early programming history we had covered, and we hadn't really covered very much at all. We got one question from one of the viewers in DConf Online 2021 asking how you had gotten started programming. So why don't we go ahead and start there, because you actually got started late. I was also a late starter for programming, but you got started earlier than I did still, but
yeah, so I was 20 and finished school, and at the time in Germany you still had to do either compulsory military service or do something social, and I opted to work in a kindergarten for 9 months, and in that time I had more free time actually than being in school, because there was no homework anymore. And like, I was already sort of set to study computer science, but had to spend those 9 years, so basically a year on like in the kindergarten. And I got a book, C in 21 days. And it took me about, I would say, 7 months to get through it. There was like nobody around me that like was able to do a bit of programming. I did a tiny bit at school, Visual Basic, which I hated and was really bad at. So like, and I sort of knew that at university I would have to program, and thought C seems to be popular, get a book and start. And like, especially at that point, like reading the chapter about pointers, which I think was day 7 or 8, like I read that chapter every day for a month pretty much before it didn't really make click, but I was comfortable enough to pass a pointer to a function and not get a seg fault like every time. And after that year in kindergarten, I started studying computer science at the University of Oldenburg, which is in the northwest of Germany. And we were taught Java in the beginning as sort of one of the first courses here, which was, interesting because, like, to a degree, I like Java was somewhat familiar after having sort of studied C by myself, but it was also different, and I found it very verbose. So that's how I got started, pretty much.
Well, that's interesting because you did kind of the reverse of what I did, because when I started with Java, and then I started getting into C, and I remember struggling with pointers also. When you did get started, I mean, were you making projects as hobby projects, games or anything? Or?
Not really. I mean, as I said, it really took me, yeah, the better part of that social year to get through the book even. And the projects then started at university pretty much. So I think in my early second year, I took a course in OpenGL. So like graphical programming, which we had to do that in Java, but like the projects really started at that point. And I, to a degree, neglected the other coursework and really focused on the OpenGL stuff because it was fun and you could see stuff. And the project started there. But like all through like the Bachelor, there were like smaller projects that we had to do. And that took much of my time at the point. So long story short, not really. Like I didn't really do any cool projects on my own early on.
I got into graphics programming with Direct Draw, and I was doing 2D stuff with that on Windows. I think I used the Andre Lamothe book that he had. He had a couple of them. He did a For Dummies book, and then he had one a bigger one that was focused on 2D game programming on Windows specifically. But yeah, I was about 27, 28 when I started programming, and I was doing it in the evenings after work. So it was slow progress for me too, but I got there eventually to make some cool stuff with it. So you picked it up just while you were there at that kindergarten, and then you go study computer science. And how did you know that that's what you wanted to do? What?
That is a good question. I don't really know that I knew. But I was interested in computers relatively early on. So I got, I think, my first computer with 12. And like back at the time, that was 1998, you still got, like, I was obviously into video games, as probably every adolescent boy at that time is. And there was like a computer game magazine called like the PC Games in Germany. And they had like a multi-issue tutorial on how to use the Unreal Tournament editor to build levels. And I thought that was cool. And I picked that up because I had the game and I liked to play it. And like even in local LAN with buddies on the weekend, like we carried our big CRT screens around and the towers and sort of had LAN parties. And like I liked to build maps, but at the time, the tooling, like the Unreal editor, was like very flaky. And for quite a few things, you had to do at least a tiny bit of scripting, or at least, how do I put this, give 2D icons on the screen in the map names and then link that to other 2D icons with names. So I already sort of got a bit of taste. I wouldn't call it programming. It was definitely not Turing complete, but like to open up a door in a level, right? You had to stand in front of it, but to figure that out, you had to sort of link a volume to the door thing. And like I found that interesting. And in school then there was like a bit of like, I wouldn't really call it computer science, but sort of introductory stuff. And also, as I said, a bit of Visual Basic, which I really loathed. But and then probably it didn't really have any better idea. And it seemed to be a sensible thing. And like other than the programming, I was relatively good at it, which also helped, obviously, to stay motivated. And then I would say, like in the first year of my bachelor studies, like there was sort of a fire under my butt, and I got really interested and more motivated in doing stuff because I saw that even at that point in like 2007, computers were everywhere. Like if you're an accountant, well, what do? You basically use a database, right? And who sets up the database? Most likely computer scientist who actually has to understand it all. Like if you want to do something with cars, what are cars run by? Computers. If you want to become a farmer, what do? You program your tractor. Like it's everywhere. And like I saw that and was interested in that. And here I am. a few years later.
I wonder if you and I aren't long lost brothers, because the Java, the C, the Unreal editor, I was tinkering around with Unreal Script and making maps, and Visual Basic. One of the earliest complete programs I wrote was a stock thing that I used. I was working in a bar as a bartender on the Army base here in Seoul, the U.S. Army base here in Seoul, South Korea, and our food and beverage manager was always complaining about the tracking system, keeping track of the stock. So I made this little thing in Visual Basic and gave it to him. He's like, "Oh, thanks, Mike. This is awesome." I'm sure he never used it. It was crap, but but it was fun to make.
I think that story probably resonates with quite a few of the, well, let's call us the older D folks that sort of started in that era. I mean, comparing the Unreal editor like in version like 1 point something to what is, like I just saw a video on the current version of the Unreal editor. Like I bet I probably would have to learn that thing for a year to be able to just place a character in an empty room at this point.
Right. Yeah.
But it was an interesting start, right? You could do something and see something and show it to your friends, and they were impressed because they didn't really have the internet at that point, or at least YouTube, to see that actually what you did comparatively to everybody else was quite crap. I mean, if I were actually able to find one of my old levels and still boot it up in Unreal Tournament now, like I would be really embarrassed to see.
Wouldn't show it to anybody.
Yeah, it was
Yes,
fun,
it was.
and you were actually able to do something and use it, and play within it. So, yeah. And I bet, like, if we ask at DConf at some point, like, quite a few other people will say that, Visual Basic, Unreal Editor, 1 point something, and C or Java in the early or mid 2000s is where they got their start.
We should do a survey at DConf this year. We should try it. So, out of university, after you got your computer science degree, did you jump straight into work?
No. So, as Germany sometimes is a bit different, after my 3 years bachelor, I did a 2 years master. And because at the time, like Germany was just phasing out the diplom, which was sort of the German way of like the certificate you get after 5 years. And to become more international, we created the Bachelor and Master program, which still was basically the diploma program, but named differently. And at least technically, you could stop after the Bachelor and get into work. But no, I did a Master. And then, so in Germany, the professors get one position normally paid by the state they are employed as sort of their teaching assistant. And that position at the professors I did write my master's thesis on or with was vacant. And so, being somewhat close to finishing writing my thesis, I said to him, "Hey, that position is vacant. Could I, like, if I apply, would I waste a piece of paper, or is there a chance?" And he said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." And so after my master's, during my master's, I applied for the teaching assistant position, which also came with the opportunity to do a doctor's degree. So, and then for the next 6 years, which is sort of the upper limit, I was employed as a teaching assistant, but simultaneously, or for pretty much the most of my time, did a PhD in computer science. And that was a really cool time. I mean, it was, in hindsight, quite good preparation for COVID, because my professor basically left me alone apart from the teaching obligations. So, like most of the PhD research was me, myself against the keyboard and screen, and then at some point the submission queues of conferences. But you had to do your own scientific research and sort of do that, which was cool. And during COVID, being at home, and not being sort of, well, I wouldn't want to say forced by your colleagues at the office, forced to doing work. You still had to produce something. And after having done that for 6 years, pretty much, I was quite comfortable with motivating myself in the morning. So then after, 11 years, I left the university. Actually, technically not being done with my doctorate, because then after I've written down my thesis by the end, but it obviously took a bit of time for the professor to read it and for the whole promotion process to go through. But all pretty much technically done.
At what point did you find D?
I found it quite early. When I was learning Java, I didn't really like having to write so much in comparison to C. And I was just sort of open for new stuff. And I think I told you this story before, but I can definitely repeat it here. I went on Wikipedia, and there was a list of programming languages, which was sorted by name, and basically started reading at the top. Like APL and A and B weren't really that interesting. I knew C, I knew a bit of C++, but that seemed daunting in comparison, especially the templates at the time in the Wikipedia article were not well explained, and I had no idea what was going on. And well, D wasn't really that much lower down the list. And at the time, GDC for D1 was actually a sensible compiler. And it took me like 2 weeks or so to get Hello World compiled at Link on my laptop at the time. And like it was always something like I came back to. It was for the object-oriented part, which we used heavily at university at the time. D was sensible because it was very close to Java. It was less verbose, like similar to C. And also at some point I understood templates in it, which sort of got me like the interesting bit out of C++. And I always sort of came back. Like I didn't really do big projects in it. I don't know, did it like a spinning box and OpenGL with it, and sort of a few command line programs for stuff I had to do adjacent to university stuff, but nothing really big. But that changed just after I was done with my bachelor's. Like D2 actually became, at least from my perspective, being by myself, more usable. Like the compiler didn't really break with every release, like it linked more reliably. And I got interested in programming languages and grammars and like BNFs and all that kind of stuff. And was sort of doing, like I thought, how hard can it be to write a decompiler? Like in hindsight, what an idiot, right? But like as like a young computer science student, how hard can it be? Let's create a new folder and let's start typing. And I basically did my master thesis on how to write a decompiler. I didn't really get anywhere, but I sort of got the lexing and parsing part out of the way, and did this by creating a lexer and parser generator, and sort of stuck that together and sort of did all the plumbing around that, and experimented with stuff and got more ingrained into like the grammars of it all and that understanding. And that was written in D. And then, the interesting bit again about the sort of German education system or the university education system at the point is that having become a teaching assistant and also a PhD candidate, the university, if you get accepted to a conference, will basically pay for your travel and your accommodation and also for the conference fee. And I think it was at the end, or like in the middle of 2022, Walter had announced a DConf near Seattle. And I talked to my supervisor, or the professor I did my master's thesis on, now also became sort of my supervisor for the PhD. And I talked to him and said, hey, I did this master's thesis here, and there's a conference coming up. Would the university also pay for my travel to that conference? And he, I think, saw that as a good marketing opportunity as well, that also, like, if you do a master's thesis and get that accepted to a conference, the university will pay for your travel to get there. Mm-hmm. I got accepted, but Walter at some point canceled the conference. And then the following year, like the first, I would call that the first modern DConf was announced in 2013.
Yeah.
And I resubmitted, got accepted, and and went there. Mm. And also sort of gave that talk that we talked about earlier. Mm. And I think on the first or second day, Andre had a talk, and the pure keyword was sort of the new hot thing. And there were a couple of math functions that hadn't been annotated, and Andre complained about that. And I was like, I can write those 4 characters after the function signature and also create a pull request for that. And so even during the talk, I think I got my laptop open, put in pure to, I have to look it up. I think it was the power function or something trivial, like really, really trivial. Submitted the pull request, and by the end of the day, that one was merged. And that got me hooked pretty much. And now it's like 10 years later.
Yeah, that was, you stole my question from me about the DConf thing. I was going to ask you how you got there. Distributed caching compiler for D. That was your talk.
Yeah. Like it's still interesting as a topic to me. And I think some of I would say most of the ideas in that thesis weren't new, and they sort of have been somewhat forgotten over time and now are resurfacing to a degree again. I mean, in hindsight, like how ignorant can you be and sort of think that as like in your master's thesis, which is, I forgot what the amount of hours are scheduled that you put in to get your master's thesis done, which is like 1/5 of your master grade ultimately. I don't know, like 240 hours or something, like nothing crazy. Like how naive can you be to assume that at that time you can write a compiler for a complete programming language, right? But it was a really eye-opening experience in the amount of realizing how much work goes into something like that, how many moving pieces there are, and also that even though you most definitely will not be done by the time or in the timeline you think, you can get quite a big project done or even make good progress on it, right? So like I learned a lot, and ultimately like it opened up doors to a whole nother world, right? Like even like I would say the universities in general in Germany are all quite good. There isn't really a big variety. We don't have Ivy League schools, but I would say most universities are like the programs are quite good. I think I went to a good university, but I would never, if it weren't for D and that conference, be or had come into contact with the people I came in contact with, right? Like I would never talk to Andre. I would have never talked to Walter. I would never met you, right? Like it's still a small town with 170,000 people.
Yeah, I remember chatting with you outside in the parking lot. You had to go meet your fiance or something.
Yeah, girlfriend at a time.
Girlfriend, yeah.
Which, like, and obviously, sort of, as the university was paying for the travel, there was sort of a nice, like, as it's Germany, everything is regulated to the last degree, and like there was only a specific amount of working days before your flight out and your flight back to Germany that the university would actually cover your travel. So I think we had like 5 or 4 working days additional holiday, or working days that can be used as holiday when you get to the destination.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought this was like a one-time opportunity. So picked the girlfriend, scraped together all the money that we could, and then sort of drove up the west coast of the US, which was an awesome trip, right? Being, how old was I? 25, 26.
Mm-hmm.
First time in the US. No, second time actually, but first time on the west coast, and then going to DConf, going to Facebook at the time, and then driving up the west coast, right? That's awesome.
Yeah, that was fantastic. And I remember that was my first time in California also. And I was home for a trip in Georgia. I'm from just outside of Atlanta, so I was visiting family there for a couple of weeks, and so I swung by San Francisco on the way back, and so that was my first time out there, and I just loved every minute of it. And finally, to meet all these people face to face, because I had known most of the people there online, and for years, because I got involved with in 2003, 2004. So 10 years I'd been involved in the community, and this was my first opportunity to meet everybody. Well, not everybody, but the people that were there. Because, I missed we had a conference in 2007 at the Amazon campus, but I was unable to attend that. So I was very happy to get to 2013. I was really bummed that I couldn't make it at 2014 or 15. But yeah, that conference has become a major highlight of my year, and my wife and I tend to make a vacation out of it these days. So, we travel around it. It's fantastic. I love going to it every year. And no, go ahead.
Yeah. I wanted to say that even I was absolutely green when it came to programming in D when I showed up, but everybody was open, and nobody was judgmental that I was young, and the age difference didn't really matter. And it was you had something interesting to say, so people listened, and you listened to people that had interesting things to say.
Mm-hmm.
And that, and also having a pull request done on the second day and having that in and getting sort of the thumbs up, and somebody turns around and said, yeah, nice job, right? And you sort of felt contributed. Awesome.
And what I love about looking at pictures from 2013, I've got some that I didn't take them. They weren't mine. I got them from Andres. There was a photographer who came and took them. But a lot of the faces in those pictures are still with us today in the community. I love that.
Yeah. And sometimes people disappear for a couple of years and then resurface. And
So I wonder, where did your progression go with the D community after 2013? I mean, did you start actively contributing?
So I started contributing to Phobos somewhat regularly. Obviously after being back in Germany and sort of working on the PhD and being a TA, that took time, but I needed to program for the research I was doing. And much of that had to run on our local cluster. So the university had a couple of racks of machines that we could use. And that had to be in C++ because the software was somewhat outdated and I couldn't get D to compile there. But I still sort of, the cool thing about being a TA or plus PhD in Germany is as long as I did my teaching duties, the professor didn't really care. Every once in a while he asked how's the research going? What are you working on? But obviously there wasn't really oversight. So if I had sort of an itch to scratch on the D part, if I now in hindsight wasted a day or maybe even a full working week on something, nobody cared, right? The cool thing about being a PhD at that point, here in Germany at least. And but still I had to use C++ for my research work as the cluster was not supporting it. But then, it was probably 2014 or so. The university was in the process of buying a new high-performance computing cluster thing. And my supervisor was also in the committee to oversee that purchase. And but he was busy, so he sent me to that. And again, sort of being green on the high performance stuff, like I basically had one agenda to get a Linux version on there where I could compile D. So basically, was going to this once a week meeting and like listening to stuff. And when it came to software, I said, like, we need this kernel version, we need this GCC version, and a few other things, which I knew were able to compile D. And at that point, when that sort of was on the horizon and I sort of got my wish software-wise, I rewrote my research program from C++ in D. And and then obviously got a lot more serious about D, and which was at that point, I would say, a hobby. And then it became more work because I was using it daily for my research. And obviously then if you use it daily, you find a lot more things that you would like to have fixed or changed or whatever.
Well, at some point, an opportunity came up for you to come to Korea, if you wanted to. The Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, KAIST, I believe it was.
Yeah. So my research for the PhD is in distributed systems. And at that time, I think it was 2016, 17, the cryptocurrencies came up, or that became very on vogue and very hip. And I mean, fundamentally, they are distributed systems, or they are a distributed system. And it looked like they wanted to use D, and then the intersection of people that knew D and knew distributed systems from an academic perspective, there weren't that many people, around or known, right? And so they approached me, but ultimately it wasn't really a good fit. And like I wasn't really done with my research at the time, or with the PhD, and I really wanted to finish that and not have sort of, well, I wouldn't want to say wasted 4 years, but have spent 4 years and haven't had the diploma at hand, pretty much. So ultimately that didn't come to fruition.
I see. So it was a cryptocurrency thing they were doing it for?
I think so.
Okay, yeah, because I know that they probably knew about D from another project that they were working on with the University of Queensland. We have a blog post about that from people at the university, but I forget now what the project is, but if you're interested and you're watching, you can check the link below and see. But I met one of the guys. He was from America, I believe, but he was working on the project at KAIST. And we had a D meetup here in 2018 or 2019 as Matthias and Mike Franklin and this guy who was working at KAIST. And I'm sure that's where they found out about D, because the University of Queensland had been using C++ for this project. And when they did their new version of it, they switched everything over to D. So that was pretty cool. So I mean, I spent so long here as the only D programmer I knew, and then I found out Mike Franklin was here, and then you almost came over, and I was like, bummer, he didn't come. And then Matthias got over here, and that was pretty cool. I cannot tell you how it feels to sit down and talk to somebody, not just about deprogramming, but about programming, because I am the only programmer I know in my daily life. You know what I mean? I was a teacher for many years.
Yeah. My wife is a teacher, and whenever like the teachers have a party, it's somewhat funny. Like, even though like I'm not seeking those people out, but now there are a couple of computer science teachers at German schools. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, I always start talking to them at some point, like without even knowing that they're computer science. It's like, like we as a people, as a group, just gravitate to each other. Like I absolutely know what you mean. Like like when I talk to other programmers and my wife is around, like she looks at us like we're talking a foreign language. And
Yeah,
we're
right.
like,
And
yeah,
when Matthias was here, he was working at a Korean company here, and he, I got hooked up teaching English to
no,
some of the staff there, and that was like the best of both worlds, right? I'm doing my regular job of teaching English, but I'm able to talk programming with the guys I'm teaching. That
yeah,
was awesome.
absolutely.
Uh, so
Yeah.
um, let's fast forward a little bit. After you got your PhD, at what point did you start looking for work, or did you look for
So,
work? I mean, were you
yeah,
recruited, or
so,
what? What's
um, like the TA position had an upper time limit of 6 years.
Mhm.
And I was approaching that, and sort of the research work was done. I was done writing my thesis, but like I wasn't Dr. Robert Schadek yet. Like I wasn't done in
Mhm.
the sense that the review of the work still had to be done. And like the year before 2017, I already got approached by Lathe, and he
Leif
basically asked,
Eichert of
yeah,
Symmetry. Yeah.
yeah, if I wanted to have a job, and I said yes, next year, and he
Mhm.
said okay. And I think it was like DConf 2018 in Berlin. He
Mhm.
came up to me, and I was already sort of planning to talk to him because my contract was running out with the university in late September 2018. And obviously, at some point, right, you need work.
Mhm.
And like he was approaching me and said, before he basically asked a question, I think I said already, yeah, yeah, like as we discussed last year. And he sort of nodded, and I called my girlfriend at the time saying, hey, how do you feel about moving to London? And at the time, yes, she said, yeah, absolutely,
Nice.
basically on the spot.
Nice.
And yeah, so we got married in late September.
Mhm.
Uh, 3 days later, moved to London.
Wow.
And, and yeah, and like she had to finish like the half term, so I basically flew back and forth from London to uh, Germany on the weekends
Mhm.
for 3 months. But like with a local low budget carrier here in Europe, it was quite cheap, actually cheaper than the train ride from the airport to my wife's.
Yeah, right.
Uh, and yeah, and now I'm still with Symmetry quite a few years later.
Yeah, and I it's very interesting, I think, how life carries us along sometimes. You know, in my capacity as an English teacher here in Korea, I have met people from so many different professions.
Yeah,
And time again, the people that I've talked to, whether they're in the oil industry, the electronics industry, you know, whatever industry they're in, uh, most of them told me that they had no intention or expectation of ever, you know, having that kind of career. You know, they all imagined some other career. You know, and I never expected to be an English teacher, especially one in a foreign country,
yeah.
to spend my life there. Uh, Looking back, I mean, I can see, you know, a lot of people who start young have a passion for programming, and they follow that passion, and they want to be a programmer. They know they're going to be a programmer. They want to be a game programmer. They might end up, you know, in a bank somewhere, but you know, it's that
Yeah.
passion for programming that gets them there. But you did not have that. You did not have that. You came to it much later. So looking back on where you've come to all these years later, you're satisfied with your job, I assume.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, uh, what are your thoughts on that, how you got there? I mean, are you is it and one of those things you look back and say, wow, what if my life had taken a different path? What?
Um, I don't think so.
Uh,
Like I think fundamentally programming or computer science or sort of related fields be it electrical engineering or any other science, or like any other natural science, it's like you're basically asking yourself all day, every day, why? Why is it that way?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you have like a goal to make something, like be it like a CRUD app or be it a game, you have to actually figure all those things out and sort of ask yourself over and over, why is it that way? Why do I have to give the indices to OpenGL in that order and not in the counterclock, or it isn't the counterclockwise order, not in the clockwise order, like all those things, right? You have to understand that. And I think I had that before I was programming. Like I ask why, like even if it were annoying, and sort of tried to figure stuff out and build stuff. And I think at some point it's just programming in that regard is a tool that allows you to do much more than you could maybe do in mechanical engineering, right? Like if you had to CNC all your parts to build this thing, like the impact you can have with a keyboard and a computer programming wise is potentially much larger, because scaling that is a lot easier. So I'm not sure if my life would have been, well, it would most definitely be different. I would probably do different things. I wouldn't have come to programming, but like the fundamental way of working, thinking, and asking yourself, why is it this way? How can I,
So,
wouldn't really be different.
So for you, it's not so much about solving the problems as understanding the problems and why things
Well, it's
work
both,
the way
right?
they do.
Like if you want to solve it, you probably have to understand it at least a bit.
Mm-hmm.
That makes it definitely easier. But yeah, it is also a creative domain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I find programming is or computer science is a very cool blend of it all.
Mm-hmm.
Like understanding it, the creative aspect of it, and then solving something, actually building something and having it used by people.
Mm-hmm.
Like people look at me if I say programming is creative, and there is sort of an artistic part in it, weird. But like back at university, my two best buddies, if they wrote programs without going into Git blame and reading who wrote which line, I could tell you who wrote which line. Like their style and their personality was displayed on the line, even though Java or C or whatever is syntactically a very restrictive language. Their style was there, and I could see that stuff.
That's interesting to me that you mentioned the creativity, because that's what draws me to it. I'm not so interested in the problem solving or any of that. It's the room for creativity. And I remember a conversation I had with Walter about this at one of the DConfs. We were sitting for breakfast in Berlin at the Ibis Hotel, and we were sitting down there for breakfast. And he was telling me how what drew him to programming and what kept him there was, solving problems, breaking large problems down into smaller ones and smaller ones and smaller ones until you build back up again to solve it. And for him, that was what it was. And I remember saying something to him along the lines about the creative side of it, and he gave me this expression like, "What?" Because he just doesn't see it that way. And but yeah, that's what drew me to it. And well, let's get back to your D work and how you started working with the Dean Language Foundation. Because honestly, I don't remember when you started joining the meetings.
Good question. Like I was a tiny bit involved with the 2019 DConf.
Mm-hmm.
Like at the time, Symmetry organized that, and the woman organizing it basically tapped me on the shoulder in the office, said, "Hey, can you come and check out the venue?" And I said, "Sure." And I got sort of a tiny bit involved in the organization because I was to all the DConfs before there. I had some expertise of, like, at least as a visitor to DConf, what I would have been expecting. And then I think I substituted John in a couple of meetings, maybe
the quarterly meetings then. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there was like either a quarterly or a monthly meeting at one of I think the first DConf
Oh,
past.
that was 2019.
Yeah,
That was, yeah,
2019.
yeah.
And I basically said to you, hey, I'm here at the meeting. Can I join the D Foundation? And you said, yeah. And I think that was, um, so yeah, being like a tiny bit bold and saying, hey, can I join? This seems fun.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, always goes a long way, right?
Yeah, that does. And that's one of two meetings that we've held in person in all these
Yeah.
years. It's hard to believe we've only had two of them in person. All the others have been online. And since you've been involved, how has your involvement evolved? How has it changed?
So I would say the amount of pull requests that I did to Phobos has dropped significantly
Hmm.
over time, just because I'm busy with
Hmm.
work.
Hmm.
Um, it's sort of more, or I think it has become more a voice of the day-to-day user of D,
Hmm.
because I'm using D day-to-day, and obviously, like if you're developing Phobos or if you're using a day-to-day or D as a whole and the whole ecosystem, like your priorities shift a bit.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think I'm one of those voices that, yeah, like of an industry user using a day-to-day
Well,
more than.
I know that you have often put forward ideas in the meeting that were really out of the box, right? Thinking outside of the box. And we are now moving toward some of them. One example is the DMD compiler daemon, right?
No.
The compiler's a daemon, a built-in LSP server. These ideas came from you, and I think it took some time for everybody else to get on board with that, because I know you brought him up again and again and again until we finally got there. So where does that come from? What sparked that
Uh,
kind of thinking?
so the compiler daemon LSP thing, that basically came from me trying out Dart and Flutter. I mean, they
Hmm.
technically do it differently, but fundamentally it's the same idea. And I used it with Android Studio, and uh, like the change, save, compile cycle was just awesome there. And with hot reloading, like UI development was just awesome. And I thought, well, this seems interesting. Let's have a look of what they do and what is possible. And fundamentally, I saw no reason why that shouldn't be possible in D. And I mean, if it's awesome there, why shouldn't it be awesome in D? And like most of those ideas, I would say, aren't really that new. It's just that, like, having been around for a while and sort of asking why and having a look at what other people do and just bringing those ideas forward
Hmm.
is helping.
Well, I mean, they're not new ideas, but they are new in the context of systems programming languages, I think. I mean, Java, we
Yeah,
had, the Eclipse IDE does all that
yeah,
compilation in the background, right? But you don't see that with system languages. So it just wasn't in anybody's, frame, I think. And
yeah.
you kind of pushed it in there. And now it's like blocking our view, and it's like we can't ignore it anymore.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, to a degree, that's how innovation happens, right? You take an idea
Absolutely.
of some domain and push it in some other, and sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it's not a good idea, and you realize that not having it in that domain made sense all those years. Um, yeah, I mean, it basically came as a need that I had, right?
Hmm.
What Jan does with his LSP, with Code and his LSP server is awesome, but some stuff can't be done there.
Hmm.
And like having that as your day-to-day tool when your code base grows just makes it easier.
Hmm.
And then if you ask why can't I have that, Walter, please, and you say that often enough, at some point he thinks, can Robert have that?
Hmm.
And
And
here we
then
go, right?
there you go. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think it is actually good that we're moving in this direction now, because there is this certain um, fact that the expectations of programmers today have changed completely
Yeah.
from the time when D was first started, when Walter first started working on it. If you're a teenager or a 20-something coming into D today, you're going to look at it and it's going to be missing a lot of the things you think it should
Yeah.
have that you've seen in other languages. Why doesn't
Yeah.
it have this thing that, this non-systems language has over here?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you were telling a new computer science student, like in 2024, hey, you're going to spend a week trying to compile the compiler.
No.
Yeah, they're going to choose a different language, right?
Yeah,
And
bye-bye.
probably when you started, it was even worse than that. Or maybe you got lucky that you got a version that actually compiled out of the box. And next week you got one that didn't. And it's sort of having an eye of what new technologies bring, and also having maybe an understanding of where we are coming from and why certain things are the way they are, and then learning out of the past and embracing the future to a degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's that's one of the reasons that we've been expanding our membership in the monthly meetings, is to get all these different perspectives on all of this. Because if it's just a handful of people who all got their starts programming in prehistoric eras, then you're not going to evolve, you're not going to change. You need that different input to push for those changes. So
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you grew up in a time where having the compiler and the linker having to be separate programs because they both couldn't fit into memory, obviously your understanding of why it is this way of having a compiler and a linker is different to when you grew up, when, I don't know, like the latest game update was 64 gigabytes or something, right?
Yeah. And, so the kids today don't have the context you have, so their expectations are completely different. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, coming back to the annual times, like I think my first map with all the textures, with the hand painted textures, were like a megabyte and a half. And that took forever to download over ESDN at the time, right? To play that online. And,
those were the days. Yeah. So we're going to start coming down toward the end of this thing now. But before I let you go, I've got to put you on the spot a little bit. So there are some people who will be waiting on news of the Bugzilla to GitHub migration. And so what can you tell us about that right now?
So I have to spend a very long evening or two and test. So the holdup basically is now that the changelog for the D-release is done from Bugzilla issues and pull requests done to the two repos. And I have to retest that program, or that program that I changed, such that even in the migration period where we have both closed Bugzilla issues and closed GitHub issues, that works. The program that does the migration of the issues, that works. It's relying on a somewhat undocumented GitHub API, but I sort of got in contact with, like, they basically sent me a link to one internal GitHub issues where that was discussed. It is not perfect, but I think it's good enough. And actually, I did the visual demigration as an example. That seemed to be working. And then I have to kick Ian to also maybe have another read over that pull request that changes, what was the file called? Changelog.d, I think, is the tool that does the changelog generation in the tools repo. And that is basically me finding the time and motivation, pushing myself to do it. And I think this is a good reminder and putting me on the spot to find the time. It's a bit like one of those things, right? It's Thursday evening, 7 p.m. You're mostly done with your week, nearly one day left to go do. The weekend is sort of foreshadowing all the things that you have to do then, and then finding the 4 to 6 hours to actually get back into the context and doing it.
Well, I totally understand, Robert. And I'll tell you what, if the foundation wasn't paying me, then there would be days when I would turn it off and, go do something else
Yeah.
instead of the things I do. But I always remind myself, well, I'm getting paid for this, so I got to do it, But
So I think technically it is done. It is down to doing the annoying testing bit and then coordinating the people and saying, hey, don't know, this Sunday morning, I'm going to get up early and do the migration. And by Sunday lunch, it's all done. And
And that secret API, that hidden API, it's faster than the public one, right?
So there are sort of two things to that. The rate limit is different. So obviously you could use, there are two parts to the problem. The original migration program was using the documented GraphQL API of GitLab, but that had a very steep rate limit. So you could do I think 100 basically mutations that change data, for the reason that you could tag people in created issues and created comments, and that would result in emails. So basically they put in a rate limit to not have GitHub become a spam farm, for the lack of a better word. And the somewhat hidden REST API allows you to tag people, but it doesn't result in emails to people. And you can also create the issue and create comments to that issue in one REST call. And also the rate limit is different. So you can do a lot more in a given time span.
Okay. And the next thing then is the new project that has been thrown onto your pile, which is containers. And I haven't done a planning update in a while. I'm going to get all of December through May done in one go. But we did talk about our priorities in one of our meetings, our planning sessions. And surprisingly, I know this surprised everybody, containers bubbled up to the top. And so you volunteered to work on that. And your conference, your DConf Online talk this year was on containers. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that project right now?
I think the people and convincing the people in which direction to go is the more challenging part than actually doing any coding. Mm-hmm. So I would say there are sort of two opposite schools of thought. There's one doing it basically the C++ STL way and having a CD vector that is implemented as C++, or in our case D, and sort of go that way. Or as I presented in my DConf Online talk, to embrace the dynamic arrays and the associative arrays and give them from D itself the last few capabilities that I think most people want. And then it's sort of like when we come to consensus on what we want, I think most decisions or technical decisions will fall out. So if we do the library way, we have to sort of integrate what we want to do with allocators, how we consider doing it safe, where I would say we can't really do it safe, or we just say this is if we say the other thing, if it's part of D, if we find a way to allow deterministic destruction of arrays and associative arrays, I think we're already there for what most people want out of them. And so it's more of a people problem and understanding where people's pains are and then making a decision. I mean, if we do it the library way, some people will complain. If we do it the D way, some people will complain. And then sort of trying to figure out not who's the loudest and the most convincing, but what are actually the technical merits and difficulties to all of them, and where I think this is also an important waystone in the direction of where we want D to evolve.
Mm-hmm.
If we obviously embrace the library approach, I would say we are sort of more embracing the C++ world.
Mm-hmm.
If we do it on a more like in-build way, I think we are closer to the Python world, even though they don't really have deterministic destruction. But it's sort of more like in-build in the language than it is like a library thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that obviously has to be in negotiation with all the stakeholders and also Walter and Attila and like the D Foundation and everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you go on code.dlang.org, you will find a couple of libraries that do containers mostly well for whatever their design criterions are.
Mm-hmm.
And like if you want to have a growable array that has deterministic destruction but isn't safe, I'll bet you find one that will suit your needs right now. But obviously having something in the language or the standard library, like the barrier to entry, if we want to call it that, is much higher, and you have to consider a lot more things.
Well, thank you, Robert. And I'm going to cut it there, but I do have one more question for you before we go. I've been asking everybody this so far. And that is because, all of us working with the foundation and with the core team started just by contributing in minor ways. With you, it started with a pull request for Pure. For me, it started with running blogs and stuff. And so what kind of advice would you give to anybody who's looking to contribute to the D ecosystem or the community or the language? How would you advise that they or suggest that they get started?
I think it's not so much about what you do, but like just raising your hand if there's a call for submissions and just saying, hey, I did a thing, and showing that you did a thing. And like what is really awesome to see after every DConf talk is like when the talk is done and the speaker sort of gets out of stage, there's like always 5 or 6 people that come up to that person saying, hey, and start talking to him. And usually by the time the next speaker needs to get on the stage, they sort of have to be pushed to the side because they're still talking. And that has happened, I would say, with everybody. And I think that is sometimes even more important than what you talked about or what you did. If you did a thing with OpenGL or whatever, doesn't matter. Like submit to DConf or submit a blog post or whatever, or write a forum post, and you will find a community of like-minded people that are interested in that thing. And it's 10 years later and you're still around. It doesn't really matter what you do. Like the self-promotion, even though that might be a tiny bit of a dirty word for some people, is, I would say, equally, if not more important.
I concur. And I do encourage everyone to consider attending DConf this year. We're going to be in London, September 17th to 20th at CodeNode. And the early bird registration is still open. It's a 15% discount off of the general registration. And by the time this video is published, we should be a few days, maybe a week away from the publication of the schedule. We've gotten all the submissions, and we're going to be picking them very soon. And Robert, I want to thank you for joining me today and for all the work that you do for us on your own time. It's pretty amazing that people volunteer their time like that. So
and nice way to put me on the spot again for the
yeah, that's what I'm here for. So, all right, Robert, thanks a lot. And to those of you watching, take a look in the description below for some links to some of the things we mentioned, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.